This is Democracy Watch. Mark, we have a pretty dangerous story that's just come into the spotlight thanks to you and your outlet, Democracy.com. I'm going to put the headline right here on the screen. Cleta Mitchell thinks Trump will use emergency powers to take control of elections. So first and foremost, can you remind folks who Cleta Mitchell is and why this is so chilling?
Yeah, this is a blockbuster story, and kudos to the team at Democracy Docket for breaking this, essentially. Cleta Mitchell is probably the most prominent, most important Republican and right-wing lawyer in the what they call the election integrity area, what we would call voter suppression. She is someone who the White House will consult with, the Republican National Committee will consult with. She has a very large following of grassroots activists. And essentially, since the 2020 election, she has spent a good deal of her time, if not the majority or all of her time, on these issues of promoting the idea that there is massive fraud, that there needs to be new laws, that Donald Trump needs to, take power. And it is all very, very chilling stuff. And when she speaks, she's not a crackpot. She's not someone who you can dismiss as just out there on the fringes saying what she thinks. When she speaks, people ought to pay attention because I suspect she has a lot of sway in the White House and a lot of people who listen to her in the White House.
So I'm gonna put up here on the screen an excerpt from her discussion with Christian conservative leader Tony Perkins. The president's authority is limited in his role with regard to elections, except where there's a threat to the national sovereignty of the United States, as I think we can establish with the poor system that we have. Then I think maybe the president is thinking he will exercise some emergency powers to protect the federal elections going forward. And so can you talk about the legitimacy of this bogus pretext that he's going to use to be able to exercise some major executive powers here?
Okay, everything she said there is dangerous and largely wrong. So I agree with her that the president does not have power over federal elections, or for that matter, state elections. The Constitution grants the states, in the first instance, the power to set the time, place, and manner of federal elections. It then gives Congress the ability to overrule those choices. There is nothing else for the president. There's no national sovereignty clause. There's no emergency powers clause. It is simply within the power of the states, with the ability of Congress through legislation to override the state decisions. So what Cleta Mitchell is suggesting here, that somehow the president can declare national sovereignty at threat and exercise emergency powers, is absolutely false. It is absolutely incorrect. It is not in the Constitution, it is not in federal law, and it is a very, very dangerous notion. It is exactly the kind of thing that we have become accustomed to Donald Trump saying, that he can somehow, by virtue of being president, can override federal law, can override state law, can override other provisions of the Constitution. And Donald Trump has alluded in some of his past social media posts that he wants to do this. I would hope that Cleta Mitchell, as a lawyer, would know better than that. But, it seems that a lot of Republican lawyers, a lot of people who should know better, have fallen under the trance of giving Donald Trump dictator-like power and authority that he does not have.
A quick note for folks who are watching, this is exactly the type of journalism that we all need to support. So if you're looking to support some fearless, independent journalism, please sign up for Democracy Docket. I'm going to put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. It's a resource I use on a daily basis. Could not recommend it further. Mark, what happens in a situation where Donald Trump decides he can do this by fiat, even though he doesn't have the authority to do so, and then the onus falls on Democrats to be able to disprove something that he already doesn't have the authority to do? Like, the Republicans are going to take it as a given that he can do this, regardless of whether it's legal or not, and then all of a sudden, the Democrats have to run to court and try to get preliminary injunctions or temporary restraining orders. Is there a way to prevent him from being able to claim that he's got the authority to do these things and then the onus falling on Democrats to be able to push back?
Look, Donald Trump claims a lot of things that are false. I mean, just someday take a look at what he has to say about sharks and electric boats.
Yeah.
Okay, just as like a jumping off point.
Right.
And look, and Cleta Mitchell has been part of that. I mean, when the famous phone call in which Donald Trump is caught on tape trying to convince the Secretary of State of Georgia to essentially find votes that don't exist. Cleta Mitchell is on that call. Like, Cleta Mitchell is a lawyer who participated in that. And, what you had in that instance was the Republican Secretary of State pushing back. So in the first instance, the right answer is that the states themselves would say, you don't have this authority, right? Like, no one has to go to court. People just say, okay, old man with a bruised hand, like, go back to the White House and work on your DJ playlist because you've lost your marbles. Yeah. But the fear is now, and a rightful fear, that Donald Trump will, number one, deploy the military or use federal law enforcement in a way that he did not in 2020. I mean, he instigated a violent insurrection in the nation's capital, but he did not, he was not able to. He was prevented in some instances from using the federal government, but Pam Bondi is not going to stop that. And I don't think that anyone's going to stand up. So that's one thing. And then the second is, of course, that we may not see the Republican establishment in the state standing up to him. I mean, if Donald Trump says, look, I think we need to decertify all of the voting machines in Democratic cities. Right. Is the governor of Alabama going to stand up against that? Is Ron DeSantis going to stand up against that in Florida? Is Brian Kemp, and Brad Rassenberg, are they going to still stand up against that in Georgia the way that they did in 2020? Who knows, right? So I think that there is this question about whether or not the political system has just caved and collapsed, that the only thing left are the courts. And believe me, I can promise you, my team and my law firm and I would be in court, the next day, preventing this stuff from happening. But I want to make sure, Brian, we don't let the political leadership off the hook here. Where would Pam Bondi be? Where would Pete Hegseth be? Like they should be the ones saying, no, you can't do that. Yeah. But of course, we know they won't.
To what extent does the ruling in California, where, again, Trump tried to offer up some bogus pretext to be able to send in the National Guard, he lost in the trial court when this case was just litigated a few days ago, and Judge Breyer handed down his ruling. And so that's one instance where Trump decides to make up some executive powers that don't exist, or at least don't hold up under the scrutiny of their own weight. And yet now we're seeing him obviously want to do the same thing, where he decides he has some magical powers that give him the authority to do something that he doesn't. And so to what extent can California kind of serve as a bulwark, this ruling in California serve as a bulwark to what he may want to do with the elections?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, every time we see a court stand up to Donald Trump, it is a good thing. Every time we see a governor insist on bringing litigation and standing up, it is a good thing. The question is, what happens if Donald Trump does this and the governors don't stand up or the legislature doesn't stand up? I mean, I use the examples of Florida and Alabama for a reason, right? Which is that they may be like, you know what? This is great. We don't necessarily want voters in certain parts of the state to be able to vote. Yeah. We don't necessarily want it to be them to be able to vote by mail. We don't necessarily want voting equipment in certain cities to function. And what do we do then, right? Because that's a different circumstance than where you have a governor like Gavin Newsom standing up and bringing litigation. The other thing, Brian, is that, when Donald Trump does these things at the national level, and we are required to go to court, that takes time. The military, by the time Gavin Newsom won this lawsuit, and I'm thrilled that he did, the troops in Los Angeles had been there a while.
And that's why I asked that question previously of when he decides by fiat that he can do something, then the onus falls on the Democrats to be able to disprove that he's able to do that. But that takes time, it takes resources. And in the meanwhile, he's decided that he's had this power and he's exercising that power. And so what happens in the event that he does something illegal, but then we have to go through this whole process, and an election day is one single day, but we have to go to the court and wait for that whole process to play itself out. And so what happens in that case where he decides he has power that he doesn't have?
Right. And just so that everyone is clear, there really isn't a question Donald Trump doesn't have this power. Whatever power Donald Trump has over the National Guard, over the deployment of the military, I think ultimately the courts in California got that right. I didn't think it was that hard a question. There is no question when it comes to federal elections that the president has no power. Yeah. So here, it really is more along the lines of what Cleta Mitchell is saying. Because remember, Cleta Mitchell starts that quote, which is that the president's power, she says, is limited. In fact, the president's power is non-existent. Now, then she goes on to make this argument about national sovereignty and emergency powers. Those don't exist. So in some respects, this should be an easier situation, but it's also therefore a much more dangerous situation. And I say that because the courts should find this a very easy thing to say Donald Trump doesn't have the power to do. And I think they would, and I think the Supreme Court would agree. But on the other hand, it's much more dangerous because he would be essentially, taking away from the states, taking away from county election officials the ability to count and tabulate ballots. By the way, that's not my words. Those are his.
Yeah.
He's the one who says that he believes the states act as his agent in the counting and tabulation of ballots. And to hear a lawyer like Cleta Mitchell, who, like I said, is very prominent in this field and has the ear of a lot of people on the right, arguing that Donald Trump will exercise this power, that this is his plan, it should have everyone, at a 5-alarm fire level of concern. And so, yeah, we're going to need to make sure the courts stand up. But Brian, I want to bring you back to where we started this, which is where is the responsible media? Where are the institutions of democracy in picking this up? I mean, yes, Democracy Docket published this and sort of broke the story, but what you are reading from is on tape, right? It's not like Democracy Docket had to find some anonymous source someplace. This is an interview she gave in which she's talking about the White House and what Donald Trump's plan is. And by the way, Donald Trump has posted on social media that he plans on doing another executive order targeting mail-in voting, targeting voter ID, targeting voting equipment, and potentially the counting and tabulation of ballots. So like, why isn't this leading the news?
Right.
Why isn't CBS News, instead of like hiring a right-wing substacker to run their news division, why aren't they leading their daily newscast with this? Where is ABC that shoveled money into the pockets of Donald Trump? Where is the Washington Post that says democracy dies in darkness? Well, if democracy dies in darkness, there's a lot of darkness going on in the Washington Post on this story. Where is the LA Times? The LA Times has seen up close and personal what happens when Donald Trump oversteps his boundaries, because that happened in LA. Where are these major news outlets? They are nowhere, Brian. And it is an absolute travesty of American democracy that we will be remembered at this time in history for how little the legacy media and the large democracy institutions of this country did when the plans were being laid out in such plain sight.
Correct. And I think that all of that underscores the importance of supporting outlets like yours, Democracy Docket. I'm going to put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description. Again, if you are not yet signed up for Democracy Docket, help elevate the voice of these journalists who are doing good work, help elevate Mark's voice, help elevate the voices of people who are actually putting the issues forward that actually make a big difference, and not just waiting until 2 seconds before Trump actually does it, because the writing is on the wall right now. So this is when we have to start fighting back. With that said, again, that link is right here on the screen and also in the post description. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Mark Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.